Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilray, and I will be your moderator. Our guest today is Chris Brown. He's the Public Sector Chief Technology Officer for a company called Immuta, I-M-M-U-T-A. You can go to Immuta.com, all kinds of information. Today, we're going to focus in on the changing world of analytics in the federal government. You know, it's one thing to be bombarded by data day in and day out, spanning the cloud, all kinds of information being bombarded for our poor federal technology leaders. But now there's increasing emphasis on self-service analytics. And I think Immuta is uniquely positioned to be able to help our federal leaders with being able to do that. And all of a sudden, you can get answers faster, and you rely less and less on the IT department and more on your own ability to gather information. But before we begin, maybe, Chris, you can give us a thumbnail sketch of your background and what this company Immuta is all about, please.
Yeah. So currently I'm the public sector CTO for Immuta. I've been with the company for about 2 years. And really my history has been both on the system integrator side, where I've delivered solutions, you know, a lot of the service-oriented architectures back in the early 2000s, DevSecOps and things like that later on. But most notably over the last few years, spent a lot of time in the big data analytics world, working within the intelligence community, Department of Defense, and even within DHS like ICE for their homeland security. So I've jumped back over to doing pre-sales for software companies. So I've actually done the pre-sales for a couple other companies, selling into the federal government. So I have over, 25 years now of experience probably selling to and delivering for the public sector.
You know, I've had Immuta on my radio show before, and we talked about role-based access and attribute-based access and some of the nitty-gritty. But I think we want to maybe pull it up to maybe 40,000 feet here and talk about exactly how Immuta can help my federal listeners achieve some of the goals they want. And one of the goals is to make sense of all this crazy data they got bombarding them. You know, there's a podcast in town here called Feds at the Edge, because there's so much going on at the edge. I mean, there's sensors on railroad tracks, we learned. There's sensors in space. There's sensors everywhere in the road and everything else. And so I think what he would try to do is find out how you folks can help our typical listener. And one way you can help is defining some terms. I go to conferences all the time now that COVID's over, and I'm learning these phrases. There's a phrase that's popped up. It's called mesh architecture. So maybe you can give us a better idea what mesh architecture means for our audience.
Yeah, so, really kind of the data mesh started, I think, earlier than most people realize. Zhamak Draki, sorry, I'm probably just butchering her name. She was with ThoughtWorks at the time, and she actually published the original blogs on data mesh on Martin Fowler's website, probably in like the 2018 timeframe, right? So this has been something that has been kind of talked about, but has really hit a lot of the, industry in the last couple of years, and it's become much bigger for people to go after. And really what the data mesh is about is really not a technology kind of play. And I think a lot of people start confusing it with, concepts around data fabric and federated queries and all this other kind of stuff. It really is more of an organizational construct to enable what they call data domains, or the people who are really experts in the data, to own and control and govern their data and share that out to, the other domains within an organization or outside the organization, right? But obviously there's a lot of technology that goes underneath the covers to make that happen, to ensure that people can actually query the data. The data is actually secure. The data is discoverable and understandable by the other domains. So there are a lot of pieces, both technology-wise and non-technology-wise. But really the key is empowering the data domains, who are the real owners and the people who truly understand the data, to be able to share that data, manage that data to ensure it's of high quality, rather than handing it over to a centralized IT team who really don't have all the kind of business context behind the data to make sure that data is fresh, it is high quality, and all those kind of things that we're looking for so we can actually do real analytics.
Chris, it almost comes back to the original discussion of self-service analytics, maybe self-service data generation, understanding what's going on. Yes. I did some research myself into this concept, mesh architecture. Been around since like 2004, so it's nothing new. I just think it's finally we got Maseratis in our garage, and then we can take advantage of it. You know, we had that bicycle in there for the longest time, but now we got the horsepower that can take advantage of some of these techniques like mesh architecture.
Yeah, it's really interesting because like I'm starting to find a lot of parallels from my work way back when in the early 2000s, where I was leading up the service discovery capability for the DISA net-centric enterprise services. And what that was all around service-oriented architectures, to where we're building these web services, service-based architectures, to be able to really share the data. And my piece was around the discoverability and the governance of those services, right? And I am seeing great parallels between what we were trying to do 20 years ago and what we're trying to do today. But kind of to your point, like technology has obviously evolved, and we have a lot more tools at our disposal. And one of the things that we are now really truly able to do on top of these large data platforms like a Databricks or Snowflake or Google BigQuery or something like that is really truly start to provide out for attribute-based access control to make runtime decisions about what data you have access to and what data you don't have access to, which was something that was very difficult to do way back in the SOA days, where we try to utilize a specification called XACML, which still is around today. But we really do have the tools and the capabilities to kind of make this happen.
So, Chris, I went to your LinkedIn profile, saw you went to William & Mary, and I noticed that at your age, probably when you were in grade school, people talked about the big three automakers. Fast forward to today, and now we talk about the big three CSPs. I mean, you mentioned one. I mean, there's Amazon, and there's Microsoft, and there's AWS. And so each has a different subtle flavor. But what happens when a federal agency maybe has to pull in data from all three of the big three? And so, they're all different. They'll have subtle different rules, and they may not apply to one and the other, and they're changing all the time. So I think this may be an obstacle for our listeners to try to hit that magic goal that the office, executive office wants of self-service analytics. So how do you juggle the big three?
Yeah, I mean, and I've seen a lot of this over the years, to where I've seen a trend a little bit on is that a lot of people kind of work, we'll call their quote unquote normal workloads in something like an AWS or an Azure, because that's where they're comfortable kind of working to build their applications and things of that nature. And I've seen them utilize a lot of the capabilities within Google, because Google has kind of led, I'll say, with their AI capabilities. And so they've been kind of head and shoulders typically above the other two CSPs for AI. And so you see this mixture of kind of like your kind of normal workloads, some of those analytical workloads may be in Azure and AWS, but those true like AI and more heavy-handed types of workloads living in a Google, right? And what's great about being at a company like Immuta is that for us, we try to be agnostic to all three. And as long as we can kind of connect into these data stores via, just a regular network connection, we're able to overlay the policies to ensure that data is secured, right? And at a very fine-grained level, like we do that column level, row levels, masking and filtering, but also cell level masking also, which is very key for our Department of Defense and IC customers. And so, that's really kind of where we're trying to, our sweet spot is, especially in these multi-cloud environments, because it is difficult to be able to try to enforce policy across all these different clouds because they all work differently.
Chris, I talked to a lot of people last week. I was talking to a gentleman from the Navy, the finance office, and I said, well, how many programs you work? Oh, 20,000. I said, so you're trying to put together 20,000 different programs, 24 hours a day, all across the globe, and it's sensitive information. Yeah. And then the dirty word came up, and FCC is probably going to yank me for this, but the dirty word is collaboration. And I said, well, I mean, this is the challenge here. And I see the word collaboration in financial management. I see the word collaboration in cybersecurity. The word collaboration comes up with data because everyone wants to have enough data to make a valid decision. And so So how can you help my leader over at DOI, Interior or Treasury, filter through all that information? I mean, if they want to collaborate with another agency, but the agency, not with Chris.
Yeah, I mean, and what's interesting, one of the other great things about kind of being on the public sector side with Immuta, right, is that's where we got started. Typically what we see is that companies start out in Silicon Valley, it's very commercial focused, and then they're like, oh, wait a minute, there's a lot of money to be made in government, so let's go try to do this thing. But Immuta actually started out of the intelligence community to where our founders actually saw the problem that you're talking about, right? And within that Department of Defense and intelligence world, right, you start bringing in security classifications and these SCIs, right? Because of what happened up in the National Guardsmen, right? Everyone's now heard of what SCI is and things of that nature, right? And it starts to really divide out the data, and you have to be actually read onto these programs. Like, you don't just get access because you have a top secret clearance to all top secret data, right? So you have special compartments, these SCI compartments that further segregate out the data. And, this is a big problem in there because we all need, and all those intelligence analysts need to be able to read from the same sheet of music, right? They all need the most up-to-date data, otherwise bad decisions get made. And how they've been solving that problem was to generally two ways. One, they make this system where the analytic system, what they call system high, which then means that only a certain few people can actually access that data, which kills your whole idea around collaboration. Like, how do I collaborate with other people? Or they start making copies of this data. So now you start asking questions, is this the most fresh data? Is this data actually the authoritative data? Am I making decisions on the right data, right? So how Immuta helps is that we allow people to come into an environment with highly sensitive data, for the example of the intelligence community and Department of Defense, and we allow everyone to come into that environment, right? And we're able to segregate out the data, right? So if we have a mixture of signals intelligence and human intelligence living in the same data store, I don't have to make it system high anymore. I can bring everyone in and on board. And if I'm only able to see like signals intelligence, all that human intelligence is no longer viewable by me. But it also allows me to collaborate with the other people who are able to see all that data, right? And like I've been doing a lot of talks around zero trust, and even though it's old from 2010s or whatever, that there was a Senate hearing on basically kind of repercussions of 9/11 and not sharing data. And one of the quotes was kind of paraphrasing, I think came from McCain, was essentially like, data that one analyst sees may mean nothing to them, but to another analyst, it's like what unlocks like the mystery. It unlocks like the problem that they're trying to solve, right? And if we're hiding that data from the people, they can't get to that data. They can't solve their problem. And it is that collaboration, right? And ensuring that one, you can allow the most people to come into the environment to see the data, but at the same time, protect that data to ensure they're only able to see the data they're authorized to see.
Chris, there are people who are listening to this and may want to learn more about self-service site. Immuta have anything for them? Any white papers, case studies?
Yeah, we have a bunch of white papers and case studies out there. We have one actually, talking about self-service analytics within the data mesh and how the data mesh enables the self-service analytics, and we're able to how Immuta plays within there. We also have a white paper that has been pretty popular within the public sector because of the executive order for building out zero trust environments. So we have one very focused in on zero trust and how Immuta fits into those zero trust environments for those analytical use cases. And then we have a number of use cases, both commercially, which, is still very valuable for the public sector to understand, but also from some of our customers that we have within like the Air Force and the OSD Ivana program and a number of others.
I've been reading a lot about the cloud, the hybrid cloud, and what can happen in the commercial world is that, let's say, Chris Brown's bicycles goes into the cloud, and then they decide, let's go back, and they repatriates the phrase, and so And so one of the questions I had prepared for you, I was going to really put your feet to the fire and go, okay, Chris, tell me. So what happens if you move everything to the cloud and then you pull it back in? Then it dawned on me, if the data is attribute based, then who cares? Huh? I mean, this is almost a who cares question, huh?
Yeah, I mean, and again, like the beauty of us is that we try to be agnostic to, a lot of these data platforms, right? And it really is just about having that network connection. And what's even better about Immuta is that we take all those policies and we push that down to those data stores. So those data stores actually become the policy enforcement point, while Immuta is simply the policy authoring, right? Because we give you this very simple, plain English, UI to develop these policies, which is great because as a data steward, typically data stewards don't know SQL. They aren't super technical. They know all the policy. And, typically, especially for me being on the SI side also, right, these data stewards come down and say, this is our policy, right, protect all PII data, but they can't actually enforce that. And so it depends on the SIs to go in and the DBAs to go in and actually enforce this and ensure that as new data comes on board, it's being done correctly and you're not leaking data. With us, like the data steward goes in, they create this very simple policy and they click, enable. And then it gets enforced across all the data stores, across all the tables, even as things change. So they're now truly in charge, right? And that's like really one of the key features is that we become the policy decision, policy authoring, not a proxy, and push those things down into those data stores, whether they're in the cloud or in your on-prem systems, right? And one of the tools that I've seen really kind of take off over the last few years, I think because a lot of these kind of repatriation or even just trying to go across different data stores and different clouds is a technology called Trino, which really has this heritage from Presto coming off of Facebook, which provides out for this federated query capability. Starburst is actually a commercial company backing Trino. People can go out to trino.io to learn all about Trino and its relationship to Presto. But we integrate with that, and so it makes it very easy for people to be able to have data on-prem, have data in the cloud, use Trino as their way to federate those queries across, and reinforce all those policies within the Trino engine.
This concept of federated governance. I mean, I don't know how you can manage the amount of data that's coming in everywhere. I mean, it's crazy. When I was talking to the guy from the Navy last week, he said when we started this program, it took 45 days to get an answer. And during those 45 days, we were bombarded with 5 more petabytes information. And then we had to go back to, so it's like it's a self-licking ice cream cone. You just go back and when's that report? It's an internal 45 days.
Absolutely.
But the Federation is a logical way to distribute the workload, make it more efficient. I think,
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, like you need to have those people who are experts in the data, controlling that data, managing that data, and not trying to, sometimes always suck it into a centralized location to where you have the delays in the data. Yeah, people who aren't necessarily experts in the data trying to do that. And so pushing it, kind of this concept of the data mesh down into each of the data domains, you gain a lot of efficiencies because they really know that data, right? And, kind of to the Navy, right? At one of my last jobs as an SI, I was working in the N1 office of the Navy, right, which is a lot of the human resources stuff where they have financial stuff. But the main thing that we were focused in on was, recruitment through retirement of the sailor, right, and getting a good understanding of that sailor all the way through his journey from being recruited, at a recruitment center to being, trained, onboarded, and all the way to retirement and all the stuff that goes on with his family, right? And it's really interesting to see how these kind of data mesh concepts can really fit in well within there because recruitment is very different than the active, very different from retirement. And there are different people who kind of control the sailor at each one of those points. And so because they now control that, and then you allow them to kind of federate that information across each of those 3 phases, we'll say, of the sailor, you can bring all that data together and make it a lot easier for people to analyze.
I was reading some articles this morning about data, and the famous RPA came up, robotic process automation came up, but I don't want to use all three words. I just want to use the one word, automation. And so some of these tags can be automated with your system. I mean, this is one of the values of Immuta, is that they can automatically tag them and don't have to worry for humans to intervene when they have a rule or a policy to follow.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, in our kind of standard deck, we have this, slide that basically shows, a few policies that you have to create, number of users, number of data sources, and you see literally, it's not a linear kind of curve as far as how many, policies have to be created and stuff like that, but it becomes exponential. So you just, at some point, there is so much that needs to be done. You can't hire your way out of it. To be able to solve the problem and do things manually. So yes, you're right. What's great about Immuta is that we kind of focus in on three things, right? One is kind of that sensitive data discovery and classification of the data. So automatically going out, analyzing your data, saying what is kind of like PII data or PHI data and things of that nature, creating those policies using plain English, editor to be able to secure your data, right, based on a lot of those policies, because to create our policies, we marry user attributes with data attributes to create these simple policies that, are dynamic and run at runtime, essentially. And then finally, which is a key piece, is the auditing of all those queries, who's making those queries, when they were doing that, right? Because a lot of, especially within the government, there's a lot of talk about kind of like the insider threat, right? So you need to not only understand what that user is doing at a network level or an application level, but what are they doing at a data level, right? And be able to combine all that information together to see how that user is trying to move through the environment. And so you can kind of then take action to, cut off access for that user if he's doing something that's kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, let's look at the next 4 or 5 years here, and I'm have you make some predictions. I'm going to come back and hold your feet to the fire here. It's like, remember that old trouble with tribbles? I mean, there's so much data coming in. I can't even believe it. I mean, petabytes is, it's just a petabyte. I mean, so in the next 4 or 5 years, they're going to be, I think the commercial and the federal leaders are going to force to come up with a solution, whether it's a decentralized solution or a magic wand or something, because it's going to be out of control. I mean, this is going to be an option for securing very secure information, but they're going to have to do something because this is too much. I mean, since we started this interview, think of all the stuff that's loading up in the DOD. I can't even imagine how much is. So what do you think is going to happen next? Is there going to be an incident, something going to happen, or do you think they're going to have to make this this federated governance transition? I
think they're going to have to make the federated governance transition. I mean, I can tell you that within the Army, they've kind of hit the wall, right? And they've actually released out 2 different RFIs to get information from industry on, how to best implement a data mesh architecture, right? Yeah. Because the Army is a massive organization, right? I mean, hundreds of thousands of people around the world, 24/7 operations, right? And massive amounts of data coming in, from sensors, right? Whatever they're kind of looking at, and even the mundane, right? All that HR data, kind of like I was talking about with the Navy, right? I mean, there's a soldier somewhere out in the field that his wife probably is having a baby or just had a baby that he needs to change his, healthcare, things. So there's just massive amount of data, and you can't build these pockets of kind of data analytical systems. And what they found is that you just can't dump everything into one big system, because it scales well at first, but because there's so much data, right, you have to hire more and more and more and more people to be able to ELT it, right, extract, load it, and then do transforms later for your analysis. You have only a single place that people can go to for all that data. And you really need to make it more of a federated governance model, more of a federated kind of ownership of the data that you are experts in for them to be able to get to what they need to. And like I said, the Army, just with the amount of data that, just them alone, how many different organizations there are there and different use cases, they've, I think, finally realized that trying to build one system to rule them all wasn't really going to work for them.
You've been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Chris Brown, Public Sector Chief Technology Officer at Immuta, IMMUTA.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.